Hello Year 12, this is a video designed to help you to structure an essay in response to Module A, Comparative Study of Texts and Context, with the prescribed texts being Metropolis and 1984. Please keep in mind that this is a suggested structure and is not designed to be followed prescriptively, but is more for boys who are still struggling with how to respond in essay form to this unit of work, or for boys who are just looking for extra tips to strengthen their essays. In this video, I will go through a few key skills. You may like to watch this video in full or jump ahead to the section that is relevant to your identified areas for improvement. Before we begin looking at how to structure the response, I would just like to remind you of what this module is ultimately asking you to do as students. So it asks you to do several things. Firstly, it asks you to engage closely with 1984 and Metropolis. It asks you to identify ideas, themes, and issues that are explored by both composers, to comment on how their social, historical, and political contexts have influenced or shaped their similar or varying perspectives of these ideas, as well as the attitudes and values that are conveyed in the texts. It asks you to then support these conclusions with detailed analysis, which is a consideration of form, structure, and literary techniques for each text. Finally, it also asks you to consider how the purpose and audience of each composer have influenced their choices. Okay, first we will consider how to write an effective introduction. Before you begin writing your introduction, you should carefully consider what the question is asking. The question could focus on one of three things. It could focus on themes and ideas, it could focus on context, or it may ask you about the choice of form for each composer. What you need to do is underline or highlight the key terms in the questions to ensure that your thesis directly responds to the question. So you should identify from the outset what it is asking you about, which of these three things. Now, all essays will discuss all three, but the focus of your thesis statement and all of your topic sentences will be determined by the focus of the question. This will ensure that you engage with the question, which is one criteria for an essay. If it's a broad question about themes and ideas, then you can choose which of these you'd like to discuss. But if the question specifies a theme or idea, for example, if it asks you about power and control, then you must discuss that idea. All introductions begin with a thesis statement. This is your direct answer to the essay question posed and needs to be stated very clearly from the outset. Your whole essay hangs on your thesis. Your thesis can be more than one sentence if needed, but it's usually more effective when kept succinct. Don't skirt around the idea. Get straight to the point with your thesis. You only have 40 minutes to write an essay, and you shouldn't spend too long writing an intro. Your thesis is your overall response to the question, and so should be general. It shouldn't mention either text. It's considered to be your position or point of view on the question posed, which you'll prove by referring to literary examples of Metropolis in 1984. Remember to keep your thesis broad and to ensure that it applies to both texts and all of your sub-arguments can be discussed in the body. Better essays generally have a thesis statement that directly answers the question without using the exact same wording as the question. A lot of boys ask whether they can practice writing thesis statements when they don't know what the question will be. Your thesis needs to respond directly to the set question, but you can still practice writing thesis statements prior to an exam. This will save you time thinking about how you can best express your thesis. Your thesis for this particular elective, if you're practicing thesis statements, should be a general statement about how composers are influenced by their respective contexts. You should try to have the rubric at hand so that you can ensure that the thesis that you come up with prior to going into the exam is relevant to the focus of the module. This will be easier to adapt when you get into the exam room. And remember to keep your thesis clear and general. As I said earlier, it should apply to both texts and allow for any arguments to be presented in the body of the essay. In your intro, you also need to ensure that you introduce the two texts by title and composer. Because this is a study of texts and context, you could briefly mention the period in which the composer produced their piece. So Weimar Germany for Metropolis and post-World War II for Orwell. But don't go into too much detail in your introduction. Just a brief mention of the historical period will suffice. Then you should go on to introducing the content of your body. These are your arguments, which should support your thesis statement. When introducing your arguments, be sure to do so in the order that you'll follow in the body of your essay. There's an important tip to be made here, and that's not to underestimate the importance of your introduction and conclusion. These are of paramount importance as they leave the first and last impression on your marker. The introduction is the first thing that your marker reads. A strong and insightful introduction will engage your marker. It will hook them and make them want to read the rest of your essay. A weak introduction will have the opposite effect. We're now going to have a look at how to structure the body of your essay. I'm going to look at two possible options for structuring the body, and I've noticed that some boys prefer option 1 and others prefer option 2, so the choice is yours. Option 1 is a conceptual structure, so each paragraph represents a different concept. Option 2 is more text-based. Once I go through each of the two options, you'll be able to make a clearer decision on which structure suits you. As you can see from the outline of the two options, for option 1, you'll need to come up with 3 common concepts explored by the composers. And remember that these must fit in with your thesis. For option 2, you'll only need to come up with 2 common concepts explored by the composers, or split your thesis up into 2 parts. So that may help you to make the decision. I'm going to go through how to write a paragraph for option 1 now. Remember that this integrated approach allows for the exploration of 3 different concepts. So let's just consider that the first concept that I'm going to explore is the loss of individualism. So my topic sentence for body paragraph 1 should make a statement introducing the concept of loss of individualism, which is explored by both composers. Then, once I've stated the common concept that I'll be discussing in the paragraph, I will discuss Lang's perspective, or values and attitudes, on the loss of individualism and how this was influenced by his historical context. That's social, political, historical. In this part, you might like to also consider how historical context has influenced the composer's choice of form and considerations of purpose and audience. Once you've established Lang's perspective on the concept, you then need to give detailed technical analysis of Metropolis in the form of film devices to support your statements. That's a thorough discussion of Lang's perspective about concept 1. You then, within the same paragraph, will go and do the same thing for Orwell's perspective. So you will state Orwell's perspective on the loss of individualism and how this was influenced by his historical context. Again, you should consider form, purpose, and audience as well. Here, because you've already dealt with Lang, you should make links between the texts. So consider how Orwell's perspective is similar or agrees with Lang's, or how it disagrees or varies from Lang's. In saying that, you then need to support that with detailed analysis from 1984, which demonstrates Orwell's perspective on the loss of individualism. Once you've done that, you can then restate the concept, so restate your ideas about the loss of individualism and link back to the question that's posed. You'll then follow that same structure for concept 2 and concept 3. And that will ensure that you cover all elements needed for a strong and solid body. Okay, so don't underestimate the consideration of context in this unit or the need for analysis of techniques. So both film and literary. If you follow this structure carefully, you won't overlook either of these. You'll then just need to apply the exact same structure for the next 2 paragraphs, but they will consider different concepts. So you'll go on to concept 2, which may be something like the human instinct to rebel. And you will make a topic sentence about the human instinct to rebel, a general one that doesn't mention either text. Then consider Lang's perspective and the analysis of film devices to support that perspective. Then consider Orwell's perspective and literary analysis to support Orwell's perspective. Then you restate concept 2 and so on for concept 3. And that's how you take the integrated approach to paragraph structure for the body of your essay. Okay, boys, we'll now have a look at option 2, which is the text-based approach for the body of the essay. This approach, as I said, allows for the exploration of 2 common concepts, or for your thesis to be split into 2 parts. The paragraph structure varies from the first option because you're only considering one text in each paragraph. So body paragraph 1 will be about concept 1, let's say loss of individualism, to keep things simple, in Metropolis. So that's what the focus of this paragraph is. Your topic sentence should make a statement about the loss of individualism, which is explored by Lang. Then you'll go on to discuss how Lang's perspective on the loss of individualism is influenced by his historical context. You'll then need to support this perspective with detailed analysis of film devices from Metropolis, which demonstrate Lang's perspective. Finally, you'll restate the idea in the paragraph, which is the loss of individualism, and link back to the question or your thesis. You'll then go on to body paragraph 2, which will be the same context but applied to 1984. So this time, your topic sentence makes a statement about how Orwell's perspective is similar or different to Lang's about this common idea. You should use linking words here to show comparison between the text. You'll then discuss how Orwell's perspective on the topic was influenced by his historical context. Remember to use linking words to show comparison between the texts here. You've already discussed the concept in your paragraph on Metropolis, so here you're discussing how the concept has been reshaped in 1984. You'll then need to give detailed analysis of literary devices from 1984, which demonstrate Orwell's perspective. Finally, you'll restate the idea in the paragraph, so the loss of individualism, and link back to your question or thesis. Body paragraph 3 will be about a whole new concept. So let's use the human instinct to rebel for the second concept to keep it the same as option 1. So in this body paragraph 3, you'll talk about the human instinct to rebel as explored in Metropolis. So your topic sentence will make a statement about the human instinct to rebel. which is explored by Lang. You will then discuss how Lang's perspective on the topic was influenced by his historical context, and you'll go on to give detailed analysis of film devices used in Metropolis, which demonstrate Lang's perspective. Finally, you restate the idea in the paragraph, so the human instinct to rebel, and link back to the question or thesis. And then body paragraph 4 will explore the second concept, so the loss of individualism, in 1984, and follow the same structure as body paragraph 2. When deciding which structure you'd like to apply, you should consider whether your thesis is better split into 2 parts or 3. This should be the determining factor. The benefit of option 1, which is the 3 integrated paragraphs, is that you can explore 3 different concepts that are common to both texts. This will strengthen your thesis because you'll have explored 3 sub-arguments. The benefit of option 2 is that you can include more detailed analysis of each text because the paragraphs only focus on one text per paragraph. If you tried to do the same level of detail in the integrated paragraphs, they would end up very, very long. So you need to make a decision about which is your preference, and I think this should be based on the question posed and your thesis statement. So considering whether it is better split into 2 or 3 sub-arguments. Now that we've discussed the 2 options for body structure, I'd like to go through 4 elements that will be included in either option. So whether you choose option 1 or option 2, every paragraph will have a topic sentence, it will discuss context, it will include analysis of devices, and all paragraphs will end with concluding sentences. So I will look at these in more detail and how to make each of these more effective. So your topic sentences are a little bit more specific than your thesis statement and should be considered sub-arguments of your thesis. This is why you need to consider what you'll be discussing, which 2 or 3 concepts you'll be discussing in the body when you construct your thesis. The topic sentence needs to clearly and accurately express the content that will be dealt with in the paragraph. No textual evidence or mention of literary devices should be included in your topic sentence because that would be too specific. Your topic sentence is just a statement of the idea in the paragraph. It may be helpful to think of your topic sentences as having 2 jobs. One is to introduce the content of the paragraph. So what will the paragraph be about? And 2 is to link to your thesis. And if you've constructed your thesis correctly, then that will answer the question. So what that will allow or ensure is that you have a cohesive response because your thesis is reiterated in every topic sentence, and a sustained response to the question because your thesis is a direct answer to the question. So it's very important that each topic sentence does both of those jobs. When discussing context, it's important that you are specific in your consideration of how historical factors have influenced the composer's perspective of the concept or idea that you mentioned in the topic sentence. So it's not enough to say post-World War I and post-World War II. You need to be more specific and show detailed knowledge of the composer's context. Remember that this is a study of text and context. You're required to consider how the composer's historical, political, and social contexts have influenced their values and attitudes, which in turn impact upon their varying perspectives of a common idea or issue explored in their respective texts. When discussing their perspectives, you should use verbs like challenges, critiques, advocates, and promotes. These types of verbs emphasize the focus on purpose, audience, values, and attitudes. They show that you're considering why the composer wrote, what they wanted to achieve, and the effect they intended on the audience. I'd now like to turn our attention to analysis, which is the element of the paragraph that students tend to struggle with the most. When analysing film and literary techniques in your paragraphs, it is important to go a step further or deeper than just identifying techniques. Boys often fall into the trap of just listing quotes and techniques. This is not considered detailed analysis, no matter how many examples you provide. For sophisticated analysis, students should go that step further and consider why the composer chose to use that particular technique or device, and what effect that has on the audience, rather than just identifying the technique. Rather than simply saying Orwell uses a tripartite structure and omniscient third-person narration in his novel, which would be considered listening by the marker and doesn't demonstrate detailed analysis, you should include a consideration of why he chose the tripartite structure and omniscient third-person narration, and what effect this has for the audience. For example, the tripartite structure of Orwell's novel reinforces the idea that the eradication of individual thought is a gradual process, thus allowing the audience to empathize with and maintain hope for the omniscient third-person narrator Winston throughout the novel. You can see there that the red is the techniques and the blue is the consideration of why Orwell chose those techniques and what effect that has on the audience. That is considered detailed analysis, rather than just identifying the technique and giving the quote from the novel. Concluding sentences. These are very similar to the topic sentences of the same paragraph, but can be a little bit more specific because you've now discussed the idea. The concluding sentence, like the topic sentence, has two jobs. One is to reiterate the content of your paragraph, so to sum up what you've said, the points you've made, and two, to link back to your thesis or the question. This again is to ensure a sustained response to the question. Let's now have a look at how to write an effective conclusion. This should be fairly easy once you've written the entire essay. This is like an inverted or upside down introduction. So, you should begin with a general statement to show that you're ready to conclude. This should relate to the question. It is a good idea to go back to the overall focus of the module in your conclusion. So you may like to mention or use the phrase intertextual perspectives, as this is the focus of this module. You then need to summarize the content of your essay. So if it helps you, you can use one sentence per paragraph to restate each of your sub-arguments or concepts. These should be concise sentences to remind the reader of all the arguments you've made in your essay. If you used option 1, you'll have 3 concepts to summarize. If you used option 2, you'll have 2 concepts to summarize. These should be organized in the same order that they were dealt with in the body. So concept 1, concept 2, and if applicable, concept 3. Finally, you should restate your thesis. So you have a final restatement of the thesis that you established in the introduction. This is the very last impression that you will leave on your marker. This should be a strong, short, punchy restatement of your thesis or answer to the question. You should try to vary the language from the one you used in your introduction so that you're not repeating yourself. Do not underestimate this last sentence, as it is your final impression on the marker before they allocate your mark. So don't rush this. You need to show that you've maintained a very strong thesis throughout and have proven this. To close this video, I've just included a simple checklist that you can use against any practice essay that you've written to ensure that you have a solid structure and that you've covered all elements of the rubric. So you can ask yourself these simple questions to make sure that you've done all the right things. Have I begun my intro with a strong, clear thesis statement that responds to the question? Have I ended my conclusion with a strong restatement of that same thesis? Have I introduced both texts in my intro by composer and title? Have I mentioned both texts in my conclusion? Have I introduced my 2 or 3 arguments in my intro? Have I summarized my 2 or 3 arguments in my conclusion in the same order? Are my paragraphs organized in a logical order? Have I used topic sentences in all of my body paragraphs? Do each of my topic sentences support my thesis? Do my concluding sentences of each paragraph match the idea in the topic sentences for the same paragraph, or have I gone off topic? Do my concluding sentences support my thesis? Have I discussed the influence of context in each paragraph? Have I supported the idea in each paragraph with detailed analysis of devices? Not just listing, but considering the choices of the composer. Have I discussed why each composer selected their respective form? Have I discussed the values and attitudes conveyed in each text? Have I discussed considerations of purpose and audience in my essay? And my final tip, boys, is to make sure that you look back over the marker's feedback, which was provided for the most recent assessment task that we did for this module, to ensure that the same errors are not made. This is available on Canvas. You should also carefully consider any feedback that you've received on your own essay. Thanks very much, boys. All the best in your exams.